Under the flickering glow of a Philadelphia ballroom, Claire Dawson lifts a glass of wine to her lips, unaware that it's laced with a toxin meant to silence her forever. Was it her ruthless mother-in-law Margaret who slipped death into the ruby liquid, or a deeper betrayal waiting to strike? One sip could unravel a family empire. Or bury her in its shadows. Hit that subscribe button and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers to uncover the chilling truth together. The Philadelphia sky bled crimson as dusk settled over the city, casting long shadows across the towering facade of Jefferson Hospital. Claire Dawson stepped out of the pharmacy wing, her white coat slung over her arm, her dark hair pulled into a loose bun after a grueling 12-hour shift. She fished her phone from her pocket, the screen lighting up with a text from her husband, Ethan. Running late tonight, research hit a breakthrough. Love you. A tired smile tugged at her lips. 8 years with Ethan Carter had softened the edges of her demanding life as a head pharmacist, but lately, something gnawed at that peace, a shadow she couldn't shake. Claire typed a quick reply, "Love you too, be safe," and headed toward the parking lot, her sneakers scuffing against the asphalt. The air smelled of spring rain and exhaust, a familiar mix in this city of old brick and new ambition. At 32, Claire had built a life she was proud of, a scholarship kid from a modest suburb who'd clawed her way through pharmacy school to land a job at one of Philly's top hospitals. Meeting Ethan had been the cherry on top, a chance encounter at a pharmaceutical conference where his warm smile and sharp mind cut through the crowd. He was a researcher at Carter Pharma, the family empire that traced its roots back to colonial Philly, a name whispered in boardrooms and ballrooms alike. But with Ethan came the Carters, and with the Carters came Margaret. Claire's phone buzzed as she reached her car, a modest blue sedan dwarfed by the sleek SUVs around it. She glanced at the screen and froze. Margaret Carter. Her mother-in-law's name stared back like a warning shot. For a moment, she considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity, or maybe masochism, won out. She took a deep breath, the kind you take before diving into icy water, and answered. "Claire," came Margaret's voice, smooth as silk but cold as marble. "I hope I'm not interrupting your busy hospital schedule." The pause dripped with condescension. "No, Margaret, just heading home. What's up?" Claire kept her tone even, though her grip tightened on the phone. "It's about Rachel's engagement party this weekend. I'd prefer if you didn't come to the rehearsal dinner on Friday. It's a small affair, just family." Margaret's words landed like a slap, though Claire had heard worse from her over the years. Claire swallowed the sting. "What about Ethan?" "I'll handle my son," Margaret replied, her voice sharpening. "You've got enough on your plate, don't you? All those pills to count." She didn't wait for a response before hanging up. Claire stood there, the phone still pressed to her ear, the dial tone humming like a taunt. She tossed it onto the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel, her hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. Just family. The phrase echoed, a reminder of her place, or lack of it, in the Carter dynasty. Margaret had opposed her marriage to Ethan from day one, calling her an upstart, unfit for their gilded bloodline. Rachel, Ethan's younger sister, wasn't much better, her sneers a mirror of her mother's disdain. Claire had endured it for Ethan's sake, but lately something felt off. As she drove through the city, past the Liberty Bell's glow and the Schuylkill River's shimmer, her mind drifted to a memory from 2 weeks ago. She'd run into Margaret at a local apothecary, a rare sighting for a woman who sent staff for her errands. Margaret had been clutching a paper bag, her manicured fingers tightening when she saw Claire. "Just some gardening supplies," she'd said with a tight smile, but Claire's trained eye caught a glimpse of the label. Datura stramonium, Jimson weed, a plant laced with atropine, a toxin she'd studied in school. Medicinal in small doses, deadly in larger ones. Margaret had brushed past her, but the encounter stuck like a splinter. Back at their apartment, a cozy third-floor walk-up in Society Hill, Claire dropped her keys on the counter and spotted something on the dining table, an embossed invitation to Rachel's engagement party. Next to it, a sticky note in Ethan's scrawl. "Mom dropped this off, asked about you. I said you were at work. Love you." Claire picked up the card, its gold lettering announcing Rachel Carter and James Whitaker, heir to another Philly elite family. She flipped it over, her stomach twisting. Margaret had delivered it in person, an unusual move for a woman who preferred couriers over courtesy. Claire sank onto the couch, the invitation still in hand. Ethan wouldn't be home for hours, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She'd always chalked up Margaret's hostility to snobbery. Claire's parents were a teacher and a mechanic, hardly the pedigree Margaret craved for her son, but the datura gnawed at her. Why would Margaret buy something like that? Gardening didn't fit the image of a woman who hired landscapers for her mainline mansion. And then there was Rachel's engagement, an event Margaret had been planning for months, a chance to flaunt the Carter name. Claire wasn't invited to the rehearsal, but the party itself? She'd have to be there, if only for Ethan. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Mike Sullivan, Ethan's college buddy and her occasional confidant. "Heard you're not on the VIP list for Friday, you okay?" Mike worked part-time at the Ritz-Carlton where the party would be held, moonlighting as a server between tech gigs. Claire typed back, "Margaret's orders, I'll survive. You working the event?" His reply came fast. "Yeah, need me to smuggle you a drink?" She smiled faintly, then hesitated before adding, "Keep an eye out for me, okay? Something feels weird." Mike's response was a thumbs-up emoji, but Claire's unease didn't fade. She stared at the invitation, the date glaring back. Saturday, March 15th, 2025, 2 days away. A chill crept up her spine, her pharmacist's instincts whispering warnings she couldn't ignore. Margaret's voice echoed in her head, "Just family." And for the first time, Claire wondered if that exclusion was more than a slight. Maybe it was a prelude. She set the car down and leaned back, the city's hume filtering through the window. Whatever was coming, she'd face it. For Ethan, for herself. But as the crimson sky faded to black, one thought lingered. What if Margaret's shadow was darker than she'd ever imagined? When Claire Dawson stepped into the apartment, the sight of the engagement party invitation on the table hit her like a warning from hell itself. The gold lettering shimmered under the dim kitchen light. Rachel Carter and James Whitaker, March 15, 2025. A stark reminder of the world she'd never truly belonged to. Ethan's sticky note clung to the edge. "Mom dropped this off. Asked about you. Love you." Claire's fingers brushed the paper, her mind replaying Margaret's cold voice from earlier. Just family. She sank into a chair, the weight of the day pressing down like a storm cloud. The apartment was quiet, save for the distant hum of Philly traffic filtering through the cracked window. Ethan wouldn't be home for hours, tied up at Carter Pharma, chasing some breakthrough she'd hear about over breakfast. Claire's gaze drifted to the invitation again, her pharmacist's mind spinning. That encounter with Margaret at the apothecary 2 weeks ago wouldn't let go. Datura stramonium, Jimson weed, its spiky seed pods hiding atropine, a toxin that could blur your vision, spike your heart rate, or worse. Margaret's excuse about gardening had rung hollow then, and now it sounded like a lie stitched together with fraying thread. Claire stood and paced to the kitchen, filling a glass with water to steady her nerves. She wasn't paranoid. Years of handling prescriptions had honed her instincts, but something about Margaret's recent behavior felt off, sharper than the usual barbs. She thought back to a family dinner 6 months ago at the Carter mansion, a sprawling estate on the main line, dripping with old money. Rachel had been there, all smirks and champagne, leaning across the mahogany table to say, "Claire, you're a pharmacist, right? Must be thrilling counting pills while we run an empire." The room had laughed, Margaret's eyes glinting with approval. Ethan had squeezed Claire's hand under the table and muttered, "Ignore her." But his gentle reprimands never went further. He always believed his mother and sister would come around eventually. Claire wasn't so sure anymore. Her phone buzzed on the counter, snapping her out of the memory. Another text from Mike Sullivan. "You sure you're okay? Margaret's been weird lately. Heard her on the phone at the hotel yesterday. Sounded pissed." Claire's pulse quickened. She typed back. "What'd she say?" Mike's reply took a minute. "Couldn't catch much. Something about teaching someone a lesson. Rachel was with her, nodding like a damn puppet. Claire set the phone down, her mouth dry despite the water. Teaching someone a lesson. Her mind flashed to the datura again, then further back to a story Ethan had mentioned once, years ago, about a housemaid at the Carter estate who died suddenly. Heart attack? He'd said, shrugging it off. But Claire remembered the whispers at the time. The woman had been young, healthy, until she wasn't. Margaret had fired her days before, supposedly over a spilt tray. Claire had never pressed Ethan for details. He hated digging into family drama. But now, those fragments clicked together like puzzle pieces she didn't want to see. She grabbed her laptop from the coffee table and opened a browser, her fingers flying across the keys. A quick search on datura confirmed what she knew. Its seeds could be ground into a powder, odorless in small doses, perfect for slipping into a drink. Atropine wasn't hard to extract if you knew what you were doing, and Margaret, with her connections at Carter Pharma, had access to labs and chemicals most couldn't dream of. Claire's stomach twisted. Was she jumping to conclusions? Or was this the shadow she'd sensed all along? The engagement party loomed 2 days away, and Claire knew she couldn't skip it, not without Ethan asking questions. She'd have to face Margaret and Rachel, their smiles sharp as knives, in a room full of Philly's elite. But if her gut was right, that invitation wasn't just a formality. It was a trap. She closed the laptop and leaned back, her mind racing. She needed a plan, someone she could trust. Mike's name floated up like a lifeline. The next morning, Claire cornered him in the hospital cafeteria, the clatter of trays masking their conversation. Mike, all lanky limbs and easy grins, was sipping coffee between shifts at the Ritz-Carlton. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, eyeing her over the rim of his cup. "I need a favor," Claire said, keeping her voice low. She glanced around. No one close enough to hear. "You're working Rachel's party, right?" Mike nodded, his brow furrowing. "Yeah, Saturday night. Black tie, big spenders, the works. Why?" Claire hesitated, then leaned in. "I've got a bad feeling about my drink. Margaret's up to something. I don't know what, but I can't shake it. Can you swap my glass with a clean one?" Discreetly. Mike's eyes widened, but he didn't laugh. He'd known Ethan since college, had seen the Carter family's claws up close. "You serious? You think she'd—" He stopped, reading her face. "Okay, damn. I've got you. I'll watch your table like a hawk. But Claire, if something's off, you tell me, all right? Ethan's my boy, and you're good people." "Thanks, Mike," she said, a flicker of relief cutting through the tension. "It's just a hunch. Maybe I'm wrong." He squeezed her arm, his voice dropping. "I hope you are. But I overheard Rachel at the hotel yesterday telling Margaret they'd make it unforgettable. Sounded personal. Be careful, okay?" Claire nodded, her throat tight. Unforgettable. The word hung in the air like smoke, curling around her thoughts as she left the cafeteria. Back at her desk, she pulled up the guest list Ethan had forwarded weeks ago. Hundreds of names, a who's who of Philly society. Her name was there, buried at the bottom, a grudging addition. She stared at it, then at the photo of her and Ethan on her desk, their wedding day. His arm around her, both of them beaming. She'd fought to build this life with him, against Margaret's sneers and Rachel's jabs. She wouldn't let them take it away. That night, alone again, Claire sat with a cup of tea, the invitation mocking her from the table. She pictured Margaret's icy stare, Rachel's venomous grin, and that damn bag of datura. 2 days. She had 2 days to brace herself for whatever was coming. Her phone stayed silent. No word from Ethan, no follow-up from Mike. The city outside buzzed with life, oblivious to the storm brewing in her mind. Claire took a sip of tea, its warmth steadying her resolve. If Margaret wanted a fight, she'd get one. Claire wasn't just a pharmacist, she was a survivor. And survivors don't drink from poisoned cups. Under the glittering chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, Claire Dawson felt the weight of 1,000 eyes as she stepped through the doors, her arm looped through Ethan's. The lye wine in her hand, handed to her moments ago by a smiling waiter, suddenly seemed less like a drink and more like an invisible blade, its edge glinting with possibility. She adjusted the strap of her navy dress, a simple but elegant choice that still felt out of place among the sea of designer gowns and tuxedos. Ethan, sharp in his black tie, squeezed her hand. "You look stunning," he whispered, kissing her cheek. "Let's enjoy this, okay? It's Rachel's night." Claire forced a smile, but inside, anxiety churned like a storm ready to break. Saturday, March 15, 2025 had arrived, and with it, the Carter family's latest spectacle. The Ritz-Carlton's Grand Hall buzzed with Philly's elite, bankers, CEOs, old money heirs, clinking champagne flutes and trading polite laughs. Claire and Ethan wove through the crowd, guided by a young staffer who checked their names against a list. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," she said, her smile faltering as she pointed to a map. "Your seats are over there." Claire followed her finger to a table in the far corner, tucked behind a pillar, as distant from the main stage as possible. Ethan frowned. "That's a mistake, right? I'm the bride's brother." The staffer shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Margaret Carter's instructions, she was specific. Anger flashed across Ethan's face, but he swallowed it. "It's Rachel's day," he muttered to Claire. "We'll deal with it later. You okay with this?" She nodded, though her jaw tightened. "For you," she said softly, squeezing his arm. They took their seats at the misfit table, distant cousins and vague acquaintances who nodded politely but kept their distance. Claire scanned the room, spotting Margaret near the main table, resplendent in emerald silk, her silver hair swept into an impeccable chignon. She caught Claire's eye and offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Claire," she called, gliding over. "I see you managed to dress decently tonight. It's a step up, I suppose." Ethan bristled, but Claire touched his arm, her voice calm. "Thank you, Margaret. It's a beautiful event." Margaret's laugh was a sharp, brittle thing. "Yes, a Carter tradition. You wouldn't understand." She turned to Ethan. "The main table's for Rachel's friends, darling. You'll be fine here." Before Ethan could argue, she swept away, leaving a trail of perfume and disdain. The evening unfolded in a blur of toasts and clinking glasses. Rachel entered with James Whitaker, her fiancé, all poise and pride in a cream gown that screamed money. Claire watched, her unease growing. Mike Sullivan appeared briefly, weaving through tables with a tray of desserts, catching her eye with a subtle nod. She'd texted him that morning to confirm. "Swap my glass if you can. Something's wrong." He hadn't questioned her, just replied, "On it." Now she trusted him to be her shield in this gilded battlefield. A young waiter approached their table with a tray of wine glasses, setting one in front of Claire with a practiced smile. "For you, ma'am." She murmured a thank you, lifting the glass to her lips, but then she stopped. A faint, bitter scent hit her nose, barely there but unmistakable to her trained senses. Atropine. Her heart thudded as she tilted the glass, catching a slight haze in the deep red liquid. Nothing anyone else would notice, but to her it screamed danger. She set it down, her hands steady despite the panic rising in her chest. Ethan noticed. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow creasing. "This smells off," she whispered. "It's not right." He sighed, a mix of affection and exasperation. "You're overthinking again, babe. Mom's a pain, but she's not..." He cut himself off, picking up her glass. "Look, it's fine." Before she could stop him, he took a sip, swirling the wine with a grin. "Tastes great, see?" Across the room, Margaret's face drained of color. She leapt from her chair, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Ethan, don't drink that!" The ballroom froze, head swiveling toward her. Ethan blinked, puzzled, the glass still in his hand. "Mom? What's wrong?" Margaret stammered, her composure crumbling. It's not yours, I mean..." She trailed off, her wide eyes darting to Rachel, who'd gone pale beside her. Claire's mind raced. She slipped a small vial from her purse, kept there for emergencies, and discreetly poured a sample of the wine inside, sealing it with a flick of her thumb. Ethan set the glass down, frowning at his mother. "Delicious wine, Mom. What's the big deal?" Margaret forced a laugh, but it was hollow, her hands trembling as she sank back into her seat. Rachel muttered something under her breath. "Why isn't it working?" And Claire caught it, her blood running cold. The room's buzz resumed, guests shrugging off Margaret's outburst as wedding day nervous. Ethan leaned toward Claire, his voice low. "That was weird, right?" "Very," she said, her eyes locked on Margaret and Rachel, now whispering furiously at the main table. She pretended to sip from an empty water glass, her mind piecing it together. Mike had swapped her drink, she was sure of it, but Ethan had taken the tainted one instead. Yet he seemed fine, chatting with a cousin about Carter Pharma's latest project, no sign of distress. The dose must have been small, calculated for her smaller frame, not his. Still, the panic on Margaret's face told Claire everything. This wasn't an accident. As the band struck up a slow tune, Mike brushed past, balancing a tray. "Swapped it before it hit your table," he murmured, barely audible. "Saw Rachel hovering near your seat earlier, messing with something. You good?" Claire nodded, her throat tight. "Thanks, Mike, I owe you." He winked and moved on, leaving her with the vial burning a hole in her purse. She glanced at Ethan, his easy smile masking the storm she felt brewing. Margaret and Rachel kept stealing glances her way, their anxiety palpable. Whatever they'd planned had backfired, and Claire had the proof in her hand. The night wasn't over, but the game had shifted. She straightened her spine, her resolve hardening. If they wanted a war, they'd pick the wrong enemy. In the sterile glow of Jefferson Hospital's lab, Claire Dawson stood with her arms crossed, the tiny vial of wine in her hand feeling heavier than it should. It was Sunday morning, March 16, 2025, less than 12 hours since the chaos of Rachel's engagement party had unraveled under the Ritz-Carlton's chandeliers. The evidence of a crime, her mother-in-law's crime, rested between her fingers, its faint red hue a silent accusation. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying Margaret's panicked shout, Rachel's whispered confusion, and Ethan's oblivious sip from the tainted glass. Now, in the lab's cold quiet, she was about to turn suspicion into certainty. Jen Harper, her lab tech friend, greeted her with a yawn and a grin. "Morning, Claire. You look like hell. What's up with the emergency vab?" Her smile faded as Claire handed over the vial, her expression grim. "I need this analyzed, not just alcohol content, full toxin screening, ASAP." Jen raised an eyebrow but took the sample without a word, her years as a pro kicking in. She pipetted a drop into the spectrometer, the machine humming to life as Claire paced the room, her sneakers squeaking against the tile. The engagement party had ended in a blur. After Margaret's outburst and Mike's whispered confirmation, he'd swapped her glass, but Rachel had tampered with it first. Claire and Ethan had slipped out early. Ethan had laughed it off in the car. "Mom's always dramatic, you know how she gets." Claire had nodded, forcing a smile, but her mind was elsewhere, locked on the vial tucked in her purse. She'd kissed him goodnight and waited until he was asleep before slipping out at dawn, the hospital her only refuge for answers. Jen's voice broke her thoughts. "Okay, this is weird. Come look." Claire hurried to the screen, her pulse spiking. The data glowed in sharp lines, traces of atropine, a belladonna alkaloid, mixed into the wine. "It's not a huge dose," Jen said, scrolling through the results. "Maybe 0.5 milligrams? Enough to make you dizzy, hallucinate a bit, maybe spike your heart rate. Not lethal unless you chug the whole bottle, or had a weak ticker." She glanced at Claire, her tone shifting. "This wasn't an accident, was it?" Claire's hands trembled as she clutched the printout. "No, it was intentional," she explained the night. Margaret's reaction, Rachel's hovering, the faint bitter scent she'd caught. Jen's eyes widened. "Holy crap, Claire. You're saying your mother-in-law tried to poison you at a party?" "That's next level evil," Claire nodded, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "I think so, but I need to talk to Ethan first." "No police?" Yet. Jen frowned but didn't push. Your call. Just be careful. Back home, Ethan was sprawled on the couch, still in his pajamas, nursing a coffee. He looked up as Claire walked in, his brow creasing. You're up early. Everything okay? She set the lab report on the coffee table and sat beside him, her heart pounding. We need to talk about last night. About your wine, he chuckled, brushing it off. What, Mom's freakout? She's always extra. I'm fine, see? He flexed an arm, grinning, but his smile faded as Claire slid the report toward him. This is from my glass, the one you drank from, she said, her voice low. It had atropine in it, a toxin. Small dose, but dangerous. I had it tested. Ethan stared at the paper, his coffee forgotten. Atropine? Like the poison? He scanned the numbers, his scientist's brain kicking in, then looked up, disbelief etched across his face. You don't think Mom would... Claire, come on, why would she... I saw her buying Datura 2 weeks ago, Claire said, her words measured. Jimson weed, it's got atropine in it. She said it was for gardening, but Margaret doesn't garden. And last night she lost it when you drank. Rachel too. They expected me to collapse, not you. Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes darting between her and the report. This is insane. She's my mother. She wouldn't... He faltered, then slumped back, rubbing his temples. I felt a little off last night, dizzy, dry mouth, thought it was the wine. You're saying that was it? Claire nodded. The dose was small, tailored for me. You're bigger, and you only took a sip. That's why you're okay. Ethan's face darkened, anger flickering behind his shock. Why? Why would she do this? Claire took a deep breath. She hates me, Ethan. Always has. I'm not Carter material. And Rachel, she's been pushing that friend of hers, Emily Brown, on you since before we met. I think they wanted me humiliated, out of the picture. Ethan stood, pacing the room, his hands clenched. This isn't just hate, this is a crime. Poisoning you at my sister's party? I can't... He stopped, staring at a photo on the mantle. Him, Margaret, and Rachel at his college graduation, all smiles. Yeah, there's more, isn't there? Claire hesitated, then pulled a crumpled receipt from her purse. One she'd found in Ethan's coat pocket weeks ago, forgotten until now. This is from Carter Pharma. Margaret ordered lab-grade chemicals last month. She's got access, Ethan. She knows how to do this. His eyes widened, the receipt trembling in his hand. No way. She's ruthless. But this? He sank back onto the couch, his voice breaking. I suspected something once, years ago, when that maid died. Mom said it was a heart attack, but the timing was off. I didn't push it. God, Claire, what if you're right? Her phone buzzed. Mike, she answered, keeping her voice low. Hey. His tone was urgent. Claire, I overheard Rachel at the hotel this morning, cleaning up. She told Margaret if she didn't drink it, we'll try again. They're not done. Claire's blood ran cold. Thanks, Mike. Keep me posted. She hung up, meeting Ethan's gaze. They're planning something else. We need to confront them. Now. Ethan nodded, his face hardening. Tomorrow, first thing, we'll go to Mom's place with this. He tapped the report, his voice steel. They don't get to deny it. Claire placed a hand on his, her calm masking the fire inside. We'll do it together, but we need a plan. They're not just family anymore. They're a threat. As Ethan pulled her close, Claire's mind raced. The truth was out, but the danger wasn't over. Margaret and Rachel had miscalculated once. She wouldn't give them a second chance. The Carter mansion loomed against the pale morning sky of Monday, March 17th, 2025. Its ivy-clad walls a testament to centuries of wealth and power. Claire Dawson stood beside Ethan at the wrought iron gates, the lab report and vial tucked in her purse like weapons she'd never wanted to wield. The spring air was crisp, carrying the scent of blooming lilacs, but it did little to ease the tension coiling in her chest. Ethan's hand tightened around hers, his jaw set, his eyes shadowed by a sleepless night. Ready? He asked, his voice low. Claire nodded, her calm a shield against the storm ahead. Let's end this. He rang the bell and James the butler answered, his gray brows lifting at the sight of them. Master Ethan, Mrs. Claire. Mrs. Cotter is at breakfast. It's early. Ethan's tone was firm. It's urgent. We're here for Mom. James hesitated, then led them through the grand foyer, past oil portraits of stern-faced Carters glaring down. The reception room awaited. Dark wood, heavy drapes, a shrine to a legacy Claire had never fit into. She felt the weight of those eyes, but today, she wasn't the outsider begging for approval. She was the reckoning. Margaret appeared minutes later, her silk robe swishing, her silver hair impeccable despite the hour. She froze mid-step, her gaze flickering from Ethan to Claire, then hardened. What's this about? Rachel's party was a triumph, wasn't it? Her voice was smooth, but Claire caught the tremor beneath it. Ethan didn't waste time. What did you put in Claire's glass, Mom? His words cut the air, cold and sharp. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed, her composure cracking. What are you talking about? That's absurd. Ethan stepped forward, his anger flaring. Stop lying, we know. Claire pulled the lab report from her purse and laid it on the table, her voice steady. Atropine, in my wine, not enough to kill, but enough to make me sick. You panicked when Ethan drank it instead. Margaret's face drained of color, her hands clutching the arm of a chair as she sank into it. I don't... Before she could finish, the door swung open, and Rachel stormed in, her makeup smudged, her eyes wild. What's going on? She read the room in an instant, her gaze locking on the report. You can't prove anything. Ethan turned on her, his voice rising. You tampered with her glass, Rachel. Mike saw you, and Mom ordered it. Don't pretend you didn't expect her to collapse in front of everyone. Rachel paled, glancing at Margaret, who'd regained her venom. Ever since you came into this family, everything's gone wrong, Margaret spat, pointing at Claire. Ethan was meant for better, someone like Emily Brown, not a druggist's daughter. Claire met her glare, unflinching. Why, Margaret? It's not just about class, is it? Margaret hesitated, then sneered. You're a stain on our name. Rachel's friend Emily, she's perfect for Ethan. If you were gone, he'd see it. Rachel nodded, her voice shaking. We wanted you humiliated, not dead. But when he drank it, Ethan's fists clenched, his disbelief morphing into rage. You planned to poison my wife, and then what? Set me up with Emily. You're both insane. He looked at Claire, his eyes pleading. I'm so sorry. She touched his arm, her calm anchoring him. It's not your fault. Margaret's tone shifted, desperate. Ethan, you're my son. You belong with us, not her. He laughed bitterly. Family respects each other. Claire's my family. You're not anymore. I'm done, Rachel sobbed, lunging forward. We were protecting you, Ethan cut her off. Protecting me? This is a crime. You're lucky we're not calling the cops. Claire stepped in, her voice firm. We won't if you stay away. Forever. Cross us again, and this, she tapped the vial, goes to the police. Margaret's bravado crumbled, tears streaking her face. Ethan, please. He shook his head, his voice ice. Goodbye, Mom. He took Claire's hand, and they walked out, the mansion's heavy doors slamming shut behind them. The spring sun bathed them as they stepped into the world beyond, a new beginning unfolding. Claire breathed deep, the weight lifting. You sure about no police? Ethan asked, his arm around her. I'm sure, she said, smiling faintly. I don't want their poison tainting us. We move forward now, just you and me. 1 year later, March 2026, sunlight streamed into a colonial-style house in Philly's suburbs. Claire stood in the kitchen, brewing coffee, her hand resting on a barely there bump. 3 months pregnant. Ethan slipped behind her, his arms circling her waist. Good morning, he murmured, kissing her neck. Sleep okay? She leaned into him, grinning. Better than ever. They'd named the baby Hope, a symbol of the life they'd reclaimed. Ethan had cut ties with Margaret and Rachel completely, throwing himself into a new research job at a rival pharma company. Claire still worked at Jefferson, her days steady and fulfilling. The bond they'd forged through the ordeal was unbreakable, a quiet strength in their simple routines. But the past lingered faintly. Weekly letters from Margaret arrived, unopened, piling up in a drawer. "Maybe someday?" Claire said one morning, eyeing the latest envelope. "But not yet," Ethan nodded, setting it aside. That night, the phone rang. Ethan answered, his face tightening. "It's the hospital. Mom's in ICU." "Stroke?" He looked at Claire, torn. "What do we do?" She took his hand. "Your call. I'm with you." After a long silence, he sighed. "Let's visit. Not to forgive, just to see?" At the hospital, Margaret lay frail, her once commanding presence faded. She wept when she saw them. "I'm not asking forgiveness, just thank you for coming." Ethan's voice was soft but firm. "Be happy, Mom. That's all." On the drive home, Claire said, "Let's teach Hope love, not hate." Ethan smiled, his hand on hers. "You saved me, you know that?" 2 weeks later, they learned it was a girl. Hope, a second chance. As spring bloomed around their new life, a text from Mike buzzed Claire's phone. "Margaret's meeting someone at the hospital. Shady guy. Watch your back." She showed Ethan, her resolve steady. "Whatever comes, we'll face it." Together, they'd broken the chain and built something stronger.